It took exactly 47 seconds for the room to shift from controlled scrutiny to stunned silence. Representative Ted Lieu, seated at the Senate Oversight Committee table, leaned forward, eyes locked on Kash Patel, whose posture was calm, measured, almost rehearsed. Behind him, the FBI director watched silently, a hint of unease hidden beneath his composed exterior. The cameras rolled, their red lights casting a faint reflection on the polished mahogany, each blink a witness to the unspoken tension. The hearing. Room smelled of polished wood, old paper, and faint disinfectant. Fluorescent lights hummed above, harsh against the soft murmur of aides shuffling documents. Senators were scattered along the curved table, some leaning back, pens poised above yellow legal pads, others tapping fingers against the glossy surface. Every subtle movement, the creak of leather chairs, the faint scratch of pencil on paper, amplified the anticipation. Microphones, arranged meticulously, captured the room's collective breath, every pause amplified for the live feed streaming into homes across the nation. Lieutenant Colonel Lieu's opening demeanor suggested controlled authority. His blazer was sharply cut, tie perfectly aligned, yet his hand trembled slightly as it rested atop the folder containing classified testimony. Inside, memos, budgets, and intelligence reports waited to confirm the narrative he had meticulously built over weeks. Cameras zoomed in, capturing the glint of determination in his eyes and the slight twitch at his jaw's corner. He had prepared for every angle, every hypothetical dodge, but something in the room felt different. Across the table, Kash Patel sat with a quiet poise. His hands, folded neatly, revealed no tremor, no defensive tension. When he shifted, the soft rustle of his suit punctuated the silence. Patel's expression carried a subtle smile, almost imperceptible, as though he knew something the committee could not yet see. The FBI director, seated slightly behind him, projected authority. Broad shoulders, crisp suit, and an air of decades spent navigating Washington's corridors. Yet even he seemed momentarily unsettled, glancing at the ceiling lights, as if the room's weight had pressed down upon him, a force only partially visible. The walls, lined with dark wood paneling, bore plaques commemorating long-forgotten committees and the memory of hearings past. A clock ticked steadily above the dais, each second stretching the room's tension, reminding all present of time's unrelenting authority. Staffers whispered in corners, passing notes. Their movements, though discreet, added a layer of kinetic anxiety to the otherwise static scene. The room was a theater, each participant both actor and audience, bound by law, protocol, and expectation. Lieu cleared his throat, the sound resonating sharply, cutting through the low hum of the room. He opened his folder slowly, deliberately, drawing the committee's focus. "Mr. Patel," he began, voice even, almost soothing, "you were directly involved in the oversight of classified intelligence programs under the Department of Defense. Could you explain, in detail, the rationale behind the allocation of operational budgets that bypassed Standard Appropriations Act oversight?" Patel's eyes flickered briefly toward the FBI director, whose lips pressed into a thin line. The room's silence deepened, as if every observer instinctively understood that this opening question was more than procedural. It was the hinge upon which credibility, careers, and perhaps legal liability would pivot. The air felt thicker, the polished marble underfoot reflecting the fluorescent glare in stark patterns that cut across the table like judicial lines in a courtroom. Every detail mattered. The slight tap of Lieu's pen, Patel's controlled exhalation, the FBI director's sharpened gaze scanning the committee members. Cameras panned slowly, catching the subtle interplay of power, legality, and human uncertainty. Outside, a muted city moved unaware, while inside, history seemed poised to pivot on the balance between meticulous preparation and an unforeseen revelation. And then, just as the first official question hung in the air, the room collectively sensed it. the unspoken possibility that the expected narrative might fracture. The silence wasn't just a pause. It was a prelude. But the silence wasn't over yet. The gavel tapped sharply against the polished wood. Senator Lieu adjusted his glasses and leaned forward, fingers lightly drumming against the edge of his folder. His voice, calm and deliberate, cut through the lingering tension. Mr. Patel, according to the Department of Defense budget reports for fiscal year 2024, $42.7 million was redirected from standard congressional allocations to what has been described as emergency intelligence operations. Can you confirm the legality of these transfers under the Appropriations Act, Section 101, subsection C? Patel's hands remained folded, a faint crease forming between his brows. Senator, all reallocations were reviewed by the department's legal counsel and deemed compliant with existing emergency provisions. These were exceptional circumstances requiring expedited response to imminent threats. Lieutenant Liu's eyes narrowed, and he leaned back slightly, scanning the room. The committee's stenographer paused, pen hovering over paper, capturing the deliberate silence before the next question. Exceptional circumstances, yes, Liu said, voice steady. But were these operations reviewed under the protocols mandated by the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, specifically FISA Section 702? Was there proper judicial oversight? A flicker of hesitation passed over Patel's face, just enough for the cameras to catch. The FBI director shifted in his seat behind Patel, adjusting his tie. His presence, silent yet imposing, served as both shield and warning. Senator, Patel replied, the operations were conducted within the bounds of executive authority. Judicial notifications were provided where legally required. Some programs operate under classified oversight frameworks. Senator Lieu scribbled a note on his pad, the sound sharp in the near silence. He looked up, pen tapping the table once before continuing. Mr. Patel, are you aware that bypassing Standard Appropriations Act reporting without clear congressional notification can constitute a violation under 31 U.S.C., paragraph 1341, the Anti-Deficiency Act? Patel's voice remained measured, but his eyes betrayed the tiniest flicker of tension. I am aware, Senator. The department's internal counsel has determined all actions remain within legal authority. Any interpretation otherwise would be based on incomplete information. The room seemed to lean in collectively, each observer, sensing the taut string of credibility stretching ever thinner. Flashes from cameras punctuated the low hum of ventilation, light bouncing off mahogany panels and reflecting off the polished tabletop. Microphones captured every inhale, every soft shuffle of paper, every faint metallic scrape of pen on legal pad. The senator's next question landed like a measured blow. Director, was there any internal memo indicating that standard notification protocols were intentionally deferred? Could such deferral be justified legally under the department's emergency authorities? The FBI director's hand brushed against his notes, the movement slight but precise. He lifted his gaze slowly, eyes sweeping the room with the weight of decades navigating Washington's corridors. Senator, such memos exist, yes, and they were fully vetted. Emergency authority as granted under 10 U.S.C. Carv. 12304 permits temporary deviations when national security is at stake. Legal counsel concurs with these measures. Liu paused, pen hovering mid-air, sensing the subtle contradiction forming between procedural obligation and executive discretion. His eyes met Patel's, then the director's, and back at the committee. He leaned forward again, voice lower now, almost reflective. So, to clarify, he said slowly, we are operating on emergency powers that bypass both congressional oversight and, at times, judicial notification. If I understand correctly, this is entirely legal according to internal counsel? Patel's lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. Correct, Senator. The room held its collective breath. Outside, a city moved forward unaware. Inside, the cameras rolled, the microphones captured, and the tension thickened. Every flick of the pen, every subtle shift in posture, was magnified under the harsh fluorescent glare. The stage was set for revelation, but the silence wasn't over yet. The room's atmosphere had thickened, the earlier formal tension now evolving into something sharper, like static before a storm. Senator Lieu's pen scratched furiously against his notepad as he consulted the internal budget sheets he had managed to obtain. Every line seemed innocuous on its own, but patterns began to emerge. Allocations that lacked corresponding approvals, memos that vanished from the official record, and surveillance programs that skirted conventional reporting entirely. "Mr. Patel," Lieu began, voice steady but edged with urgency, "our committee obtained internal memos dated March 3rd and April 12th, indicating that the department executed operations without notifying congressional oversight. These memos reference classified code names that do not appear in the official budget. Can you explain this discrepancy?" Patel's hands remained folded. For the first time, his controlled demeanor showed a micro-flicker of strain. "Senator, those programs were initiated under classified emergency protocols. Disclosure, even within the committee, is limited to protect operational security and national interests." A subtle murmur rippled among aides. The FBI director's gaze sharpened, focusing on Lieu with a measured intensity. He reached for his notes, the faint rustle of paper magnified in the near silence. "Senator," the director interjected, "all operations cited were reviewed under internal legal frameworks. We maintain compliance with FISA 702, which governs electronic surveillance of foreign targets, as well as emergency provisions under 10 U.S.C. Barf 1234. However, some details remain classified." Lieu leaned back momentarily, absorbing the words, the contradiction beginning to crystallize. He adjusted his glasses, fingers tracing the outline of the Appropriations Act sections printed in his folder. "Director," he said slowly, "Section 101C explicitly requires timely notification to Congress for reallocations exceeding $25 million. Failure to comply may constitute a breach of the Anti-Deficiency Act. Are you asserting that the department intentionally delayed reporting to comply with internal interpretation of emergency circumstances?" The director's jaw tightened, a subtle but telling sign. "Senator, every decision was made with legal counsel's concurrence. Emergency circumstances are by definition exceptional and subject to expedited procedures." Lieu's voice dropped slightly, drawing the committee's attention. "Mr. Patel, internal communications also indicate that certain surveillance programs continued beyond initial authorization periods. Under FISA 702, such extensions without judicial or congressional notification can constitute a violation of due process." "Were these programs extended without proper review?" Patel's eyes briefly flicked toward the director. "Senator, extensions were handled under classified review boards. Legal oversight is maintained, though not all procedures are publicly documented." Silence descended. The committee seemed to hold its breath, each member processing the implications. Camera flashes stuttered as if capturing time itself, while pens hovered mid-air, catching every micro-expression. Outside the hearing room, television screens across the country relayed the unfolding drama. Legal ambiguity playing out in real time. National security entangled with congressional accountability. Lieu leaned forward, voice low and deliberate. "Director, if the committee were to assert that delayed reporting and extended operations violated 31 U.S.C. Proverb 1341 and the notification requirements of FISA 702, would you concur that procedural missteps have occurred?" The director's hand brushed his notes with measured precision. His voice was calm but firm. "Senator, any assertion would need full access to classified files. Partial disclosures risk misrepresentation of compliance." Lieu's pen paused, hovering above paper. The contradiction between legal technicalities and operational secrecy hung palpably in the air. Every eye in the room sensed it. A gap between perception and legality, oversight and executive discretion. The tension had escalated to a near-physical weight. Outside, a city unaware moved forward. Inside, cameras rolled. Microphones captured every subtle breath, and the first fissures of revelation began to form. The silence wasn't over yet. 47 seconds. That was all it took for control to fracture. Senator Lieu leaned forward, eyes narrowing, pen poised as he asked the question he knew would force a reckoning. Director, if the department knowingly delayed congressional notification while continuing classified operations beyond their initial authorization, isn't that a direct violation of both the Appropriations Act, Section 1001C, and FISA 702 provisions regarding oversight? For the first time, the FBI director's measured composure faltered. A slight tremor ran through his right hand as he gripped his notes. The fluorescent lights above cast sharp reflections across the polished table, catching in the thin line of perspiration forming on his brow. Cameras rolled, capturing the tension with merciless clarity. Patel's posture, previously unyielding, stiffened imperceptibly. His gaze darted briefly to a side aide and back to the committee, calculating, seeking an escape within the confines of protocol. Liu's voice remained calm, surgical in precision, but his questions now carried the weight of exposure. Director, are you asserting that emergency provisions allow the department to override statutory requirements for congressional notification indefinitely? The director inhaled slowly, then exhaled. Senator, emergency provisions are meant for situations that demand immediate action. The department maintains that no legal thresholds were intentionally breached. All actions were vetted under internal counsel review. A subtle pause, and then it happened. Liu's eyes widened slightly as he held up a memo, its classified stamp unmistakable. This document, obtained through standard committee channels, shows authorization for Program Zephyr was extended for 6 months without notification. Legal counsel's own notes question compliance with the Anti-Deficiency Act. Can you explain why this was not reported? The director's hand trembled visibly as he reached for the folder. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple, catching the harsh fluorescent glare. He glanced at Patel, whose lips pressed into a thin line. The cameras caught every flicker of unease, the minor micro-expressions magnified into an undeniable collapse of authority. Silence fell. 47 seconds stretched like an eternity. In that span, the room held its collective breath as the realization settled. The director's carefully constructed defenses had crumbled. The procedural missteps were no longer theoretical. They were documented, undeniable, and constitutionally significant. Liu's eyes scanned the committee, noting the subtle nods of recognition, members who understood, at last, the gravity of the breach. Director? Liu's voice was controlled, deliberate, yet heavy with finality. This is a direct violation of 31 U.S.C., paragraph 1341, the Anti-Deficiency Act, and arguably compromises statutory oversight under FISA 702. You are legally obligated to provide full disclosure immediately. The director exhaled, shoulders sagging slightly, papers shuffling under trembling hands. Cameras clicked in rapid succession as the nation watched. For those 47 seconds, every carefully guarded procedural shield collapsed. Legal oversight had caught up to executive discretion. The room's silence was deafening, punctuated only by the faint rustle of notes and the low hum of ventilation. Patel remained still, mask intact, but even his composed expression betrayed the slightest flicker of uncertainty. The committee sensed it. For once, operational secrecy could not shield them from statutory accountability. The room, polished wood and harsh lights, became a stage for institutional reckoning. Every breath, every eye movement, and every reflection in the marble floors testified to the fatal fracture. Careers hung by a thread, constitutional obligations were highlighted in stark relief, and the cameras captured it all. The 47 seconds ended, but their impact rippled. The silence wasn't over yet. By the time the hearing adjourned, the story had already leapt from Capitol Hill to every major newsroom in the country. Television screens flashed images of Senator Lieu holding the incriminating memo, juxtaposed with the FBI director's visibly shaken posture. News anchors' voices were taut with astonishment, each syllable emphasizing the unprecedented nature of what had just unfolded. Constitutional scholars called it the most devastating Senate takedown since Watergate, said one anchor, voice steady but tinged with disbelief. For 47 seconds, America watched competence collapse in real time. Cutaways showed viewers at home frozen in front of screens, cups of coffee paused mid-sip, as the gravity of the confrontation sank in. Political analysts dissected the events with meticulous detail. On one network, a constitutional law professor noted, "The procedural missteps documented here are significant. Violations of 31 U.S.C. Paragraph 1341, the Anti-Deficiency Act, carry not just statutory implications, but set a precedent for executive accountability." The delayed notifications, compounded with the extended operations under FISA 702, create a gray area that the Senate is compelled to address. The media coverage didn't limit itself to legal implications. Pundits debated the optics of the FBI director's faltering composure, Patel's calm yet uneasy demeanor, and Lieu's methodical dissection. Every micro-expression, every subtle hand tremor, became a symbol of institutional tension. Social media amplified the spectacle. Clips of the 47-second collapse circulated widely, often accompanied by legal experts breaking down each procedural nuance for lay audiences. Inside Washington, the political fallout was immediate. Committee members began confidentially discussing follow-up hearings. The Department of Justice issued a statement emphasizing that all actions were conducted under classified emergency provisions. But analysts noted that the statement lacked clarity regarding statutory compliance. Congressional aides quietly circulated memos assessing potential violations, while senior staffers calculated the political ramifications of public disclosure. Law journals and political magazines devoted entire issues to the hearing. Headlines read, "Oversight Exposed. The Collapse of Authority. When Emergency Powers Meet Statutory Law, and FBI Director Stumbles Under Senate Scrutiny." Editorials explored the tension between operational secrecy and constitutional oversight, questioning how an agency could maintain national security while remaining fully accountable. In the corridors of power, whispers were louder than official statements. Senators from both parties analyzed the implications for future appropriations, surveillance programs, and emergency powers. Legal counsel debated potential enforcement actions, while investigative reporters pursued every nuance, fact-checking each statement against classified and public records. The public, meanwhile, absorbed the spectacle through every media channel. Talk radio dissected the 47 seconds in granular detail. Podcasts debated the strategic failures and legal missteps. Citizens on forums speculated about the long-term implications for executive accountability. Every moment, every gesture, every sentence spoken in the hearing was replayed, dissected, and recontextualized. Amid the swirling media storm, one observation was nearly universal. The collapse had been both procedural and symbolic. For 47 seconds, the nation had witnessed a perfect convergence of political drama, legal reality, and human fallibility. Washington's institutions had been tested, and in those fleeting seconds, the fragility of authority had never been clearer. Yet, as headlines proliferated and social feeds buzzed, the underlying question lingered, heavier than any tweet or broadcast. Could such a failure be fully corrected? Or had the fissure revealed something deeper, irreparable? The silence wasn't over yet. The hearing room, now empty, echoed faintly with the residual tension of the day. Chairs scraped softly against polished marble floors. Papers lay scattered like remnants of a battle fought in whispers and measured phrases. Outside, sunlight cut through the tall windows of the Senate chamber, casting long shadows across the walls, a reminder that even in Washington, time moves forward, indifferent to spectacle or scandal. In the aftermath, the significance of the 47-second collapse rippled far beyond the walls of the hearing room. Careers, reputations, and institutional trust had been tested, revealing the delicate balance between executive discretion and congressional oversight. The event had forced a nation to confront the realities of legal compliance, operational secrecy, and the human dimension that links them. Judgment. Legal scholars reflected on the missteps with precision. The conflation of emergency authority with statutory bypass creates a constitutional tension that is not easily reconciled, one wrote in a prominent law journal. The Anti-Deficiency Act exists to ensure fiscal responsibility. FISA 702 mandates oversight. Yet, when discretion becomes unilateral, the law loses its practical force. The Senate's role as watchdog is reaffirmed not by confrontation alone, but by the clarity of accountability it demands. Meanwhile, in newsrooms, analysts parsed every nuance of body language, every hesitation, every micro-expression that had betrayed uncertainty. The FBI director, once an icon of disciplined authority, was now a subject of both critique and reflection. Patel, though calm, could not escape scrutiny. His poised demeanor was now a case study in measured response amid unfolding legal jeopardy. Politicians and the public alike were left to wrestle with the moral dimensions. Could national security truly justify bypassing statutory oversight? Was the adherence to internal counsel sufficient when formal notification requirements were ignored? And most profoundly, what did it mean for a democracy when the guardians of law falter under the weight of secrecy and procedure? For Representative Lieu, the hearing had been both professional triumph and somber reminder. Legal mastery and procedural vigilance had exposed cracks, yet the process itself was not victory. It was accountability, measured, deliberate, and sober. He understood that in politics, as in law, every answer uncovered further questions. Every revelation demanded reflection. As the light in the chamber shifted from harsh glare to softer afternoon tones, a symbolic weight settled over the empty mahogany tables. The hearing, the collapse, the media storm, all were ephemeral in the flow of history, yet the lessons endured. Oversight requires not only diligence but moral clarity. Authority requires not only power but restraint. And above all, law functions not merely as a set of rules, but as a living mechanism to safeguard both security and liberty. Some careers end in scandal, others in silence. Washington doesn't punish ignorance, it replaces it. And in that truth, the nation glimpsed the subtle, relentless mechanics of its own governance. Imperfect, human yet profoundly necessary. The chamber grew quiet, the cameras long packed away, leaving only the faint echo of a 47-second moment that would linger in history. The silence had ended, but the reflection remained.